We have an inbound threat that we need to respond to. That is where I begin to, frankly, advocate for autonomous decision-making, because the speed with which that inbound threat is coming at us, whether that's a class 1 or a class 3 drone, size matters, we have to be able to respond to that at the speed of need. And I think as you start to look at some of those defensive systems, that we absolutely have to see the human in the loop as a bit of a vulnerability.
Do you really know not just who you're targeting, but who you are actually killing at the end? And that's the other thing, with the speed and the scale of AI-enabled war technologies, how much time is there for doing battle damage assessment, after-action reports, to really understand the impact of these weapons?
If you're sitting in an air-conditioned van in Alabama, and it becomes almost like a video game for you to look at stuff, and you're pressing a button, and somebody dies 6,000 kilometers away, and you never see them, you don't know them, you get up and you have a cup of coffee and you walked away, What does that do to the psyche of a soldier? Does it make killing easier? Does it implicate you less? I'd like to call on stage someone who has been at the heart of transforming the nature of war in the 21st century. He's been with the US Special Forces, Special Operations Commands. He's been with the NASA SEALs. He's been with the intelligence agencies in America. And now he was the first AI director with the Pentagon. And now he's with Palantir, the company that is called the Central Operating System, of intelligence and of military operations in America. It's completely shifted the boundaries, integrating AI into the realm of conflict and war. It's going to be an insight from the very engine rooms of global conflict and taking us into a sobering world of where this human-machine interaction can really take us. into the realms of geopolitics as well as the realms of morality. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome David Spirk, the man at the heart of this changing nature of war.
All right, thanks.
David, I already shared a pocket bio of your extraordinary CV. You know, you've been at the nerve center of so many things, which is really the hard edge of the world. I wanted to ask you, first of all, to share with the audience and help us understand how this needle is shifting. You know, when you said you were there when Kandahar was taken, you know, you flew in then, that was a different nature of war then. How has it shifted? Where are we at in 2026?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to sit in front of so many people here. And
will you speak a little bit louder?
yes, thank you for having me. It's an honor to sit in front of so many people. And just the presentation, I was saying backstage, actually I'm more terrified by you than large language models, because your ability to just manage all of these topics is unbelievable, unbelievable. I think, you know, starting in the beginning where we were, and to your point, for me it's not theoretical, it's practical, it's operational, it's what I've done my entire adult life. When we went into Afghanistan in 2001, I wish the systems that we had now had been in place, because had they been in place, the attacks on New York City, the attacks on the Pentagon, they never would have happened. And I can only imagine a world where, had we been able to connect those dots, where we would be today as a civilization, a global civilization. That said, they happened. It's a very real fact. And so now, as I look at the tools that we had at our disposal in the early days of the war, and even prior to that, my first deployment was in Bosnia as a member of the Peace Stabilization Force. We were using hard copy maps. We were putting laminate over them and using Sharpies and getting reports on even stickies and trying to correlate those to information that we had associated with the environment we had never operated in before. And so our ability to understand the environment, to conduct a meaningful operation under the laws of war and the rules of engagement that we had, we did the best we could with what we had under the guidance of make sure the threat is suppressed. As I look at where we've moved today, and it has been a fairly rapid technological change, even though, you know, I was a very young man in 2001, and now I'm a pretty old guy.
You're pretty young now as well.
But looking at just that 24 years, the ability to take technology that initially was maybe started for the national security platforms, I'd say now transitioned and perfected for the commercial sectors, and then coming back in and taking some of that technology and incorporating it in, I'd say that we're in a place that our ability to be precise is 100-fold better than when we started the war.
But you know, just again to draw the audience into this world, that can you be a little bit more specific about, you know, when you say that your ability to be faster, what is this new canvas, you know? What is the data that you're really plumbing? What are the different data sets? Where are you gathering that from? And then what is the role that AI is playing in that? And when you say precision, over the last 2 days, we've been talking about how imprecise actually AI can be, especially the LLMs. So I want to know if you're using something else, if you're using the LLMs. So give us, again, like I said, the specificities of this. Start with the data sets.
Okay, I'll start with the data, which is easy for me as I'm a data guy and I usually do AI in air quotes. The data, you know, just ensuring that you have access to all of your own data. You know, when I started at U.S. Special Operations Command as the first Chief Data Officer, there were these grand dreams of artificial intelligence and how it's going to power our way forward. And we had an idea, and we knew that we needed to get our data organized and do that. But I remember turning to the then commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, General Tony Thomas, and saying, I just want to be able to count our stuff and know where it's at. And so, you know, when you think about that journey, how do we identify our siloed data sets, some of which we use to sense the environment, some of which we just use to understand the assets that we have at our disposal. And how do we start to ensure that none of those are siloed so that we can take advantage of all of the data that's presented itself in front of us? Now, we obviously have signals intelligence, human intelligence. We have all of the intelligence disciplines that we account for. I think one of those that even prior to my arrival as the Chief Data Officer at US SOCOM was publicly available information. I remember when we were trying to confront, right after ISIS had taken Mosul, and were conducting horrific acts across Syria and Iraq, they were very effectively using the information environment to recruit troubled, I'll say youth, from around the world. And so our ability, and my goal, was to stop the foreign terrorist fighter flow. How could I do that? So I went out and I looked at the publicly available information. I looked at the sensitive intelligence we had to understand who the influencers were, how they were conducting propaganda, information operations, to get these troubled youth into a net so they could begin funneling them into this combat environment where then these radical extremists would push them to the front lines as cannon fodder and then continue the cycle. What we tried to do was set up a multinational organization primarily with law enforcement under the umbrella of the U.S. Special Forces' ability to understand how to conduct broad data analysis, bring them in, leverage their own unique authorities, using their own unique data sets so that we could merge those together, leveraging artificial intelligence, using, I'll say advanced analytics at the time, so that we could create an understanding of individuals who, instead of reaching the combat zone, we could pass a packet to law enforcement in their host nation and stop them from coming to the combat zone, and hopefully have family members and friends interdict them before we had to do something about it. So I think looking at all of the information that was available then, and understanding all of the information from a commercially available, publicly available information data that you can run your credit card and use now. Again, I keep saying 100x, but I think we're at 100, 1,000x, even from when we were conducting those activities back in 2014 to where we are now.
From your perspective, this is, like you said, it makes you more effective, it protects soldiers, it possibly is a deterrence, it also prevents, it's preventative, because if you know something's happening, you can stop it before it happens. So give us a couple more examples. For instance, I just read that, in the Venezuela raid on Maduro, that Anthropic's Claude was used for that, So help us understand in what way AI is being used, because we are now moving to a level where there isn't human intervention, that AI is taking the decisions. Help us, even in bombing in Gaza, Israel used Where's Daddy, it used Lavender, and one understands that there's no human intervention in that. How are the parameters for this set?
Yeah, I think I'll try this.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think when we talk about individual large language models, which one was used, I would tell you that we regularly use multiple. That each large language model has a particular capability that it's better at than others. Leveraging platforms like Palantir's artificial intelligence platform, where you can bring multiple data sets, thousands of data sets, almost infinite amount, in that would be required. What we're able to do, leveraging the current state of generative AI, is put those in a method and get them into workflows where they're leveraging what we have already considered authoritative data sets.
You've already considered?
That we consider authoritative data sets,
okay.
that we are being provided authoritative data sets, or the government is saying these are our authoritative data sets. And then what we can do is box those data sets and build workflows with domain experts who understand how this will let them be more precise in whatever war-fighting function that they conduct, whether that's fires, whether that's logistics, whether that's information operations, whatever that might be. And so it has enabled us to understand and sense the environment in new and unique ways, faster than we could have before. In some instances, if the workflow demands a predictive analytic for a uniformed service member, then they now have that ability to do their job with more precision and efficiency than they've ever been able to do it before.
But you know, the phrase AI kill chain is now coming into popular consciousness. Help us understand how an AI kill chain happens. You know, that's what I was asking you, that who would set that? Is it that the AI independently sets a target, it's doing its own parameters, its own analysis, and it tells an autonomous drone to drop a bomb and kill someone without a human intervention?
No, it does not. It absolutely does not.
You're just scared of saying that that is what it is.
Yeah, no, it does not. What it allows, I'll say, a fires officer in an operations center to do is to have a quicker understanding of where there might be a threat. And what they're able to do is to get to that capability faster. What it allows them to do is to use different types of information to correlate that actually is a threat, so that then we can bring more exquisite capability to take a look at that, to determine if that needs to go into what one would consider a targeting board that could then begin an actual validation process that in the past, because it was very manual, because there weren't the automated workflows that went associated with, even just digitizing some of these capabilities inside an AIP-like platform. Now we're able to take things that potentially we would have missed because it would have taken a day, 2 days, a week to do the analysis to determine that that is actually something that we need to put human eyes on, pay attention to, and bring through what we call a targeting board. Sure. To move it to a place that then we can pass that onto a platform that it can actually use the right munition for the right job, sometimes which isn't kinetic.
So, David, again, that's not to, I'm not bringing any sort of moral, social perspective on it right now, because we first want to understand, and it's a very real world of conflict and threat, so one wants to understand the sort of gravity of that before one questions the social and moral implications of it. So when you're saying that, these systems now enable you to analyze faster than the speed of light almost, then that's great, and there's no argument over that. I was asking about the decision making, because when one says that it's an independent AI kill chain, when you're saying it's autonomous weapons, and that this is only the start, the vision is to move further where humans are not in the loop. Help us understand what that is. How does decision making happen? Yeah. If you're passing on precise, intelligent, quick data onto a commander like yourself to take a decision, that's more or less traditional war done better. But I'm asking about AI being a decider.
Yeah, we're not at a place where AI is the decider. We're at a place where AI guides us to what we need to pay attention to faster, so that humans can decide faster. Because at the end of the day, when we're talking about the speed of war, the speed of precise decision making is the thing that wins the day. So your ability to get to the place where a human can decide, this is the application of force that I'm going to put on that objective, and I can audit why that happened in a manner that's faster than we've ever been able to accomplish before. That's the step that we're at right now. I think that's when we're talking a kinetic. That's when we're talking a AI kill chain, as you said. I don't use the word kill chain. I use the term targeting, which is doctrinal.
Alex Karp, who's your founder of Palantir, right, uses the phrase AI kill chain all the time.
He's great. He is. I grew up 28 years in uniform and in the federal side, so I often divert to the doctrinal language use that I've just learned over my career. What I would say is, now there's other things that are occurring outside of that targeting process, outside of fires, where force protection is another component of the military vernacular. And when I start talking about counter UAS as an example, it's things like that, things that when we have an inbound unmanned aerial system, we have an inbound threat that we need to respond to. that is where I begin to, frankly, advocate for autonomous decision making, because the speed with which that inbound threat is coming at us, whether that's a class 1 or a class 3 drone, size matters, we have to be able to respond to that at the speed of need. And I think as you start to look at some of those defensive systems, that we absolutely have to see the human in the loop as a bit of a vulnerability, because these are moving so fast that we need to be able to detect, we need to be able to interdict to save our airmen, soldiers, Marines, Guardians, we've got them all now, so that when they're out conducting operations on behalf of our nations, our partners and allies, that we can defend them effectively. So I think when we talk about autonomy, it's the operations that we're talking about being autonomous, the ones that probably lend themselves to not having a human in the loop, but again, now having an auditability of those that we've never been able to have before.
So, even this data gathering, what is the scale of data that is being picked up, David? And I'm pushing on that because I do have an ancillary question, but is it satellite data? You said public data. Is it the data on our phones? Are you guys hacking our phones? Are you picking up health data, which I know you are? So things which we knew to be siloed data, and you very powerfully said that, and I understand. As I said, in a conflict zone, you said more dangerous for you today than a missile is a siloed data, that you want to know every signal available on the planet before somebody else does, right? So does that mean that we now have to live in a world where we know that from our faces to our license plates to our health data to our personal chats to satellite data, all of that data is now being funneled into companies like Palantir or to any other defense military situation I won't even use I'm not going to use a layered word, just for the objective of analyzing data and knowing where a threat might be emerging.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a commercial corollary here. A commercial corollary. My wife, as an example, will ask me, have you been looking at golf clubs? Because all of a sudden in her Facebook feed, she begins getting, tailor-made driver this, tailor-made irons that, and she's determined that I've been, looking for my next purchase. And when you look at how the commercial sector is leveraging your own data to determine what next ad they're going to feed you, I think we're not doing anything more intrusive than that. And frankly, I think the U.S. government is using publicly available information that they're legally either provided or that people are providing themselves, not of our own citizens, but in threat environments, to bring that in and to begin using that alongside data that is collected from traditional intelligence sources, so that we can understand the environment and, again, facilitate smarter decision making within the laws of armed conflict.
So, David, again, we are, going to enter into the moral, social dimension of this. I'll concede that we may not have the luxury, possibly, to deny the right of those who are in the military or in the government to know this. But there are many implications of you or others having access to all of this data. So I do want to call you out a little bit on when you just said that not on our own citizens, but on adversaries. Right back from Edward Snowden to, even way back to Julian Assange and others, we do know that America is spying on its own citizens, It's also being used right now, say, by the ICE, where they have entire maps, where dossiers of confidence scores. And I was reading, again, it's publicly available, that the data that Palantir is using is literally from, like, you're a moving target, your license plates, your health data, which really should be private data, to your phone chats, your face recognition. All of that is being used for domestic purposes. So to know that, this is a legal or illegal immigrant, you're basically mapping the entire citizenry of America, not to mention possibly in India as well, So first, is that accurate?
No, not exactly. I think that it's not our data, it's the government's data. It's our software.
Well, the government promises to keep it siloed, but you're pretty much telling us that no data is siloed anymore.
I think the commercial sector shows you that their ability to feed you ads that are targeted to your unique needs make it hard to believe that anybody would think that they can move through society with nobody
footprint.
With no footprint. As soon as you opt in to your phone, you're using that data. You're presenting a signature of yourself, and frankly, you're opting in. And so I think there's a component of that we do have to pay attention to. And then I'd say, whatever the laws of a nation are, that's for the government to administer. What I'll tell you is that I'm proud to be with a company that understands how to protect PII, privately individual information, and publicly and private health information in a manner so proficiently that we can do it within the laws that have been provided and within the left and right lateral limits that the government wants.
So, I'm just going to stay with this a little bit more, which is about data gathering itself. So, you have satellites, and I've actually asked the Indian military commanders that with this level of satellite network across the planet, how is it that you don't know there's a Chinese buildup on the Indian border? How is it that you don't know? How is it that Israel missed that there was a buildup happening, on October 7th? So at one level, there's this idea of like massive surveillance, and then at another level, there's still ball drops. So one is to help us understand that. And the second is that now you have autonomous submarines, you have autonomous drones, you of course have the satellites. So how do these autonomous instruments know what data to pick up? Like, what are they picking up? What are the parameters being set for autonomous submarines and,
I would have to ask the Navy that, because they're the ones that build those.
You've been a Navy SEAL as well,
Nope, not a Navy SEAL,
oh, okay.
a Marine.
I just thought you've been everything.
Much different. But I think we have to understand that everything now is a sensor. We wear sensors on our bodies. I have my Whoop on now. And if you're building a platform, it's collecting data. I still remember in the early days of Project Maven, when we were talking to true commercial AI experts, they said if you thought you had a data problem before AI, just wait until you move into this environment, because not only is it collecting data, it's producing data, and that's more data that you have to make sense of. And so as we step into an environment where we have systems, and frankly where, again, the commercial sector is launching satellites to sense the environment for agriculture, to sense the environment for temperature changes, to sense the environment for whatever the unique thing might be, that data now can be acquired commercially by somebody. And so I think increasingly the use of publicly available information by nation states, instead of bespoke systems that maybe have more funnels and less breadth, is becoming available and will be used to stop some of those events, or at least be able to understand that they were about to occur so they can be interdicted before a response option has to.
So just a couple more questions before I bring somebody else onto stage, which is that, you've been saying that it helps more precision and more speed. So I would like to ask about Gaza, for instance, and we had the Israel cyber chief last year, we've had the Mossad chief before, and, the question there is that when there's a capability to assassinate an Iranian scientist several thousand kilometers away, with that level of precision, or pick up a Maduro in Venezuela without any soldier casualty for yourselves rather than there was casualty for others, then why in Gaza has there been so much of collateral damage? And like I said, they do admit to the fact that they've used AI systems like Where's Daddy, Lavender, Is it that there was parameters set where collateral damage was okay, or is it that these systems are not as precise as you make it out in some messy situations?
Yeah, I can't speak for the Israeli military, for the Israeli Defense Forces, and the decision-making processes as they went through their doctrinal targeting capabilities. What I can say is that I know the threat was immense and underground and built for a very long time. And frankly, in my opinion, they were leveraging humans as shields. above ground for their nefarious actions and military, not even military, terrorist operations underground. The ability to target those is probably very hard. I think the extent of that probably wasn't quite as understood on day one as it became the more that they were able to understand and sense that environment. So the munitions that they would use, I would have to guess, but I can tell you that they were very precise, that they're much more precise than carpet bombing in Germany in World War II. And so we can see this evolution that again is a response to a horrific act that occurred against the Israeli people in defending themselves.
Right. So this is where some of the other dimensions come in, David, which is that we're talking about immense power now. You know, there's not just the power of traditional military might of America, but there's also, you know, the ideological lens through which one sees any adversarial situation. And then you have all of this data, and then you have autonomous weapons, you know. So to decide whether someone is an adversary or not, to take away all nuance from that situation, you know, whether somebody is just a driver, what is their sort of social situation, you know, that can you resist if the Hamas asks you to be a driver? You're not a killer, you're not one of their armed soldiers, you're part of an ecosystem. You know, I reported in India, in Chhattisgarh, when there was a big sort of face-off between the state and the Maoist movement there. And there were tribals who had no option. You know, they were just caught between the state and the Maoists, and they were often killed, but when you went and spoke to them, you understood their dilemma. You know, they're in a conflict zone. If the Maoists come and ask them to do something, they have to do it. If the state comes and asks them to do something, they have to do it. Is that a situation where one can kind of have 70,000 civilians dead and still call it precise killing?
No, I think that moving into an era where we're using data-driven technologies to be a lot more precise and to be able to parse that, you know, is absolutely the goal. I think that we probably didn't have the same capability then that we have now, that it's improving as our ability to leverage AI to split that hair, to better understand and to better make human decisions associated with, you know, when we should or shouldn't take action and the type of action that we should. I think that's the promise of AI. I do think, you know, we've got, I'll say, a ways to go in understanding all the socioeconomic and political drivers and religious drivers associated with how we break all this apart. But that's why we need to continue moving forward with this technology. When we talk about autonomy, I also still think we need to remember, you know, we've been using autonomous weapons, maybe 1.0, for decades. You know, when we used the first laser-guided munition, when we used the first GPS-guided munition, there was a point that a human made a decision and then the weapon released and went to where that was supposed to be. Again, I'll go back to where we started the conversation a little bit. The promise of leveraging AI, of being able to put code on a kinetic capability and have it moving towards an objective now gives us a better opportunity through that whole span to understand and to be more precise about where that target, where that munition goes and what it does when it gets there at a level that 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago, we still were less worried about.
Right. I have so many questions, David, but you know, I'm going to bring someone else on stage to deepen this conversation at a more social, political, and moral level, because it is immense power, you know, and I think it does need to be interrogated. I do want to ask one further question, which is that when you were saying that, you know, all our commercial data, like our phones and maybe our earpods, we had a speaker last year called Nita Farahani, and she was warning about an even newer frontier that is coming, which is that now companies are able to pick up not just your overt data, you know, what you did, what you bought, what you said, what you looked at, but that it's being able to pick up your thought data, you know, so it's even so liminal that you're thinking something and your wearables and your phones are picking that up. We also have AI that is doing sentiment analysis now, you know, so you have AI that's running under the surfaces of our public lives, reading your emotions, reading your sentiment, analyzing that, sending that back to whoever, maybe like Palantir is an operating system that's analyzing this. I mean, at some levels, this is just terrifying, you know, because you may have a thought today which changes tomorrow. It doesn't define you as a person, but it's got heat mapped somewhere as you've had a momentary desire to kill your husband, you know? And that makes you a potential murderer, you know? And now we are seeing this in predictive policing. We are seeing it, AI being used in whether prisoners can get parole. There's cultural biases, you know. We're talking about erasing history. Whatever America decided is the Palestinian situation, or Israel decided is the AI is learning that, you know. So it seems to be devoid of so many layers that make up human life, you know. So would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, again, you know, I can only speak to the use of it for doctrinal military operations that I've been involved in. I do understand the corollaries in the commercial sector. I'll go back to those. For some time, I've read about credit card companies as an example.
Sorry, would you just speak?
Every time you make a purchase, grading your emotional score, and then passing that back so that they can target the next ad towards you, they can target the next purchase towards you. I do think that is something that individuals have to be aware of and make personal decisions about how they're using these technologies in their daily lives and what they want to do with them as they opt in or out of leveraging whatever app, you know, on any given day that they want to use.
There's no scope for opting out, you know. I mean, there's no scope for opting out. We're all in the grid now, you know. So, yeah, so I think that cultural conversation around it does need to grow. And I do want to, David, I understand I'm putting you in some uncomfortable spots, but I do want to concede, like I said, that there are very, very difficult military and security situations that people like you have to deal with, you know, so that is another dimension, but it's seeping a lot into our civilian lives as well, so it's an important conversation. And in that light, I would love to bring on stage somebody else actually who has been a very important, no, please stay on stage.
Okay.
Yes, you're not getting away from this one. You can see how much mayhem that's causing. Just. I'm going to call on stage a filmmaker, an award-winning documentary filmmaker who's made several films, but the one we're going to focus on is called National Bird. And it was made several years ago, but it again is a window into some of the issues that are intensifying in their complexity and urgency and seriousness. It's a film on soldier whistleblowers who used not autonomous weapons, but enabled weapons. It's the kind that David was speaking about, where you press a button and a weapon far away does its thing. And she spoke to soldiers who were traumatized by this, and she made a film with whistleblowers speaking of the costs of war, you know, even though much of this is to create soldier safety. So before we call her on stage, we'd like to show you a little window into her work.
They were always trying to kill people. They always wanted to be blowing someone up.
Anybody who's believed to be of age 16 or older, they are a legitimate target.
People die, things get destroyed. It's like borders don't matter anymore.
When we say children, we talking teenagers or toddlers?
I would say about 12, not toddlers. Something more towards adolescents or teens.
We'll pass that along to the ground force commander. But like I said, 12, 13 years old, a weapon, it's just as dangerous.
Oh, we agree, yeah.
What's the master plan, fellas?
I don't know. Hope we get to shoot the truck with all the dudes in it.
Yeah. Sensors in, let the party begin. Remember, kill chain.
Will do.
Roger. And, oh, there it goes. Stand by.
There's a new national bird. Just an organism, not in an organization of peace. Shoveling shit in the belly of the beast. You got roped in on an economic trap. Couple years gone in the wisdom of sun. And the chain of command doesn't care. You see,
I was
well aware that what I was about to enter was something that I was against. We feel guilty about our past actions.
You see someone die because you said it was okay to kill them. And I can say the drone program's wrong because I don't know how many people I've killed.
I was told that they forgave me for the part I played and what happened to them.
Ain't no citizens in this new world. Only rigged decks and a box of loaded cards to burn. By the time you learn this rule by few, you're in a green zone. Look at the trap that you've walked into.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sonia Kennebeck.
Thank you. Thank you.
You want to turn around so that the two of you can speak to each other? Sonia,
What an opportunity.
Sonia, you heard David lay out this very complex, arena and field and that they do operate in, where there's so many threats and it's all emerging and it's live situations. And he himself served in Afghanistan, so it's two sort of lenses on the same canvas, and that's what makes it even more poignant. So do tell us what led you to these stories, and what was the core takeaway that you got from speaking to the soldiers who were in Afghanistan dropping drones, during that particular war?
Yeah, so when I started my research around 2012, 2013, the reason was that there was so little information out. And the first reported drone strike was, as the public knows, in October 2001. And by 2012, 2013, the general public in the US knew very little about drones. So that's the reason I wanted to start and research and really talk to the people who were part of the system. And when I did my first interview with one of the whistleblowers I found, she told me in that very first conversation that she had lost multiple of her friends to suicide. And that's when I immediately understood that, okay, there's more to it. There's a lot of trauma. It was sold publicly as this very clean, precise weapon, but even on the side of the people fighting the war, you could see that there was trauma, or what is more known now, moral injury. So there was not just the effect, and of course, that's the biggest pain, the civilian victims of drone strikes gone wrong, but you also have consequences amongst the people fighting the war.
So, before we draw David back into the conversation, take us deeper into this, that what is the nature of that injury? What caused it? Why were they so injured by the fact that they were in this war zone with the drones?
Well, if you are a very young person, and often the person who is analyzing the imagery, they are first time enlisted, 18 to 24 years old, and they have to make a call that has such major consequences, it really impacts the psyche. And as you just saw in the video, the woman I interviewed, she also said, I didn't know how many people I killed, and she had to analyze the video and say, this person is carrying a shovel, or this person is carrying a weapon, and then also making an estimation of someone's age. So is this person 12 years old, or 16 years old, or an adult? So, and all these decisions replayed in her head, she told me. And that's what was really keeping her up at night, was I making the right decision? And then you see all of that at scale, because drones, by the time I was doing the film, were already deployed in very, many different scenarios in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen. So you have many of these situations where later on, the military operatives, the people would read in the news about, weddings being bombed, civilian deaths, and they wonder, how much of a role did I play in it?
So, would you think that, to David's point, that earlier what information was imprecise, now with AI and with the level of data mapping that is being done, for all its other social and moral implications, but do you think that, as you must still be in conversation on this topic, do you think that at least at level of precision it has become better?
It's a very difficult question because there is such a lack of transparency on, you had this conversation. It really depends on what data sets the AI is trained on, and also how permissible the targeting rules are. I think, it's a very complex scenario, and we've had, already yesterday and today a lot of conversations about the limitations of AI, and many people here on stage have talked about the risks and also that AI is not as intelligent as humans, but then on the other hand, we are already using AI in one of the most complex scenarios, in a war scenario, which is complex, highly dynamic. We are fighting, this is remote warfare where you have, asymmetric wars. You have, people who are, making decisions and who are supplying the data sets that are halfway across the world. So my questions are, in the data sets, what role does civilian harm mitigation play? Is that already part of the design? Cultural context, you talked about cultural bias. That's, there's also automation bias, like people's trust in technology, and yes, there should be human oversight, but if there is, such, speed and scale, how much time is there for human oversight, and then the risk of the people in the decision-making process relying possibly too much on the technology. That's what I've seen when people use technology. They don't fully understand how it works, and they have a lot of trust in it. So what I think, when you add AI, you add speed and you add scale. And so it can exacerbate risks, and it can exacerbate civilian casualties as well.
So, Sonia, when you made this film, and it was, back in 2014 or so, what was the reaction? How did the U.S. military respond to you? Were you made to feel uncomfortable? Were they interested? What is the range of experiences you had on that?
So I thought, for me, the most remarkable reaction was by the general public in the U.S. because I went to Afghanistan to interview the victims and survivors of drone strikes gone wrong. And
can everyone hear Sonia at the back? Yes.
I can also speak up. So in Afghanistan, people at that time, when I was there in 2015, really were very well informed about drones and how drones work and the technology. Not so much on the other side of, the people who were fighting the war in the U.S. Of course, the military, the people, the veterans, they know about drones, but the general public was shocked. I was showing my films to people who knew very little about drones, and all they had heard were sound bites by President Obama, who said precision strikes, some of the terms that you were using as well, targeted precision strikes. So they had the image of, maybe a sniper targeting one person, and when they saw my film, they saw bombs being dropped on buildings, and they were shocked, and some of them came out in tears, and they thought, like, oh, these are massive planes, they are carrying massive bombs, and that was, a very strong reaction, that they didn't fully realize the scope of the war. And then my question is always, who is in the building? do you really know not just who you're targeting, but who you are actually killing at the end? And that's the other thing, with the speed and the scale of AI-enabled war technologies, how much time is there for doing battle damage assessment, after-action reports, to really understand the impact of these weapons? And then the next concern, the next step is, of course, feedback loops. When you have strikes with a lot of civilian casualties, and that is not thoroughly assessed, is that data feeding back in and again exacerbating the problems? Are we escalating wars? And consequently, are we making our world safer or the opposite?
David, those are questions that I would love to hear your perspective on.
Yeah, I would. Is it working? I would say that there's a very structured feedback loop. That anytime there's a strike that has a civilian casualty, it's taken beyond seriously, and an investigation, frankly, occurs every time. And the forensics of that, the auditability. I also think we need to be realistic about the fact that it's never just one source of intelligence. It's always layered intelligence that brings those that are authorized to make a strike to that conclusion. And so it's not just a single thing, there's layers beyond it. And again, I'd say that the application of data-driven technologies allows us to make better decisions now because there's a richer context that you can apply to that.
So David, on that, I'd ask you again that, you were just saying transparently that you would advocate for autonomous decision-making as well. And I think, again, there's two layers of that, that if there's a missile coming at your country and you have created an autonomous decision-making to put up whatever shield or counterbalance it, I don't think there'd be any discussion, It's about when you have to take human life, and if that then is a machine that's deciding it with preset parameters, that's where the discomfort and anxiety would arise. So that's one point. But just to stay with Sonia's story a little bit more, let's move away from the victims for a moment and just look at the soldiers itself, that did you encounter this sense of moral injury? What does it do to the psyche of a soldier if you're sitting in an air-conditioned van in Alabama and it becomes almost like a video game for you to look at stuff and you're pressing a button and somebody dies 6,000 kilometers away and you never see them, you don't know them, you get up and you have a cup of coffee and you walked away, What does that do to the psyche of a soldier? Does it make killing easier? Does it implicate you less? Have you had these conversations with fellow, military people?
What I can say is when we decided to start our pathfinding AI effort back in 2016, one of the goals of beginning that process was so that we could use computer vision to detect, identify, and geolocate objects in full motion video. And frankly, it was initially one of the goals of that was so that we could reduce the burden on those imagery analysts so that they didn't have to stare at a screen for 8 hours a day and potentially have those moral injuries, so that we could have computers do what computers do best, which is that's an object, this is what the object is, this is where the object's at, and hopefully reduce some of that burden. So I'd say that what we're actually trying to do is reduce some of that potential moral injury that I know we do have our chaplain service and others that have engaged in, that we have recognized that this is real and this is something that we need to treat in our troops and take account for. And so leveraging some of these advanced technologies, we're actually trying to buy that down, because years of reaction to an attack on the United States and our partners and allies has caused us to respond.
Sorry, I didn't, again, I was having a bit of a reverb and I couldn't hear did you already, I heard a bit of it in terms of, you are helping soldiers not have to look at a screen for 16 hours and AI is doing that. But the second question to that was this sense of distance killing. What does that do to you? Does it become like a video game? And the human sort of dynamic, as painful as it is, having soldiers' feet on ground, more dangerous, definitely, has its own traumas. But is this video gaming of war something that you all are discussing within the military?
I haven't met anybody.
It's not a concern area.
No, I haven't met anybody that would associate this type of thing with a video game. I think this is a serious business brought on by serious people and conducted in a serious way. I would tell you that I personally have been more concerned about the strikes that we weren't able to take, knowing that there were women and children who are going to face an atrocity, but because I didn't have the layers and levels of intelligence then that I would probably have at my disposal now that would authorize me to, I'll say, interdict, and that interdiction could be a kinetic strike, it could be a capture operation, whatever it might be. I think those are ones that we also need to think about, because it's a bit the other side. It's never, I'll say, flippantly taken, a strike, and there have been, sorry, is there a reverb coming?
Yeah, there's a echo sound coming on his mic. Yeah, just.
And I think the other side of that equation is knowing what atrocity is about to happen, understanding that the threat exists and you can see it, but because you don't know, I'll say that there won't be any collateral damage or anything associated with that. It is also troubling because you do have to make some of those calls, and some of those are no strikes.
So, we're going to run out of time, Sonia. So, guys, my mic is giving trouble again. We're going to run out of time. So, I would like you to share with the audience what happened to one of the whistleblowers, that he ended up being in jail for 5 years, and why was that? How did the military respond to him? Why did he have to end up in jail?
So I found and interviewed 3 military whistleblowers, and one of them, his name is Daniel Hale, and during the production of the film, he was raided by the FBI under the Espionage Act, and the Espionage Act of 1917 is a very serious law in the US where you can come after whistleblowers and theoretically also after journalists. And so they raided him and investigated him for many years. And we continued filming. I interviewed him. I actually say in my film that, the filmmakers didn't receive any classified information from the participants in the film, but I did find out many years later when his case went into the pre-trial, he was indicted, that he had also disclosed documents. And one of these documents actually was also talking about civilian victims. There was a region in Afghanistan where there were airstrikes, and around 90% of the victims were civilians. So I do believe that having documentation as well can be crucial for transparency. And one of the issues that we have in this whole complex of war and AI is that we need conversation. We need conversations between the stakeholders, and we need transparency and access. Of course there's national security, but there needs to be some transparency to check what data is being used, because the consequences are so high. What we're talking about here is life and death. So that's the reason I think you need transparency and you need accountability.
That's a great note to end on. Having the opportunity of both of you being on stage, some years ago, I had brought the CIA and Taliban together on stage, so having you and her on stage, I shouldn't be mediating. Sonia, I would like to ask you, if there's one question you'd like to ask David, what would that be? You want to leave him with a food for thought. What's the question you'd ask him?
What is your worst case scenario with AI and warfare, where it's headed?
I actually think the worst case scenario is that doomerism and pessimism and concerns about decision making prior to leveraging this technology that is at its infancy keeps us from advancing and leveraging artificial intelligence and data-driven decision making. I remember when I came in the military, and I won't talk about kinetic actions. I'll talk about just finished intelligence assessments. It was PhDs who were coming in and reading reports and telling generals generally what they thought based on a cup of coffee and 5 reports and a current event. That's actually what brought me into the field of data, because I thought there was a mathematical way that we could bring more precision to intelligence assessments. Frankly, it was just old school Pearson product correlation coefficient type stuff in Excel. And so I hope that we understand the future of using math, the future of using technology will continue to improve both our ability to act with precision and efficiency, and also recognizing that we have peer competitors who are rapidly trying to take these technologies that they're using in their own societies in profound ways that would trouble all of us just in their daily lives. And there's a global competition, and that if we don't accelerate our ability to use this technology and improve this technology, because we are on a campaign of learning in the application of it, that they will outpace us, and frankly, we won't have the deterrent for future large-scale wars.
David, if you were to ask Sonia one last question at the speed of the AI that you're, with that level of lightning speed, what's the question you'd ask her, because we are out of time?
I need to think about that. We didn't prep for this one. She and I did have a wonderful conversation in the green room, and we're going to follow up. I think my question would probably be, if you were in my seat for a day, what would be the next step? How would you improve what we're doing?
Yeah.
Do you want to leave that a rhetorical question, or do you want to answer that?
No, I'm happy to answer that. I do think it's actually at the core of what I was saying about bringing different stakeholders to the table, that I have experienced, this kind of siloing of there's some military, and they're looking at military, operations, and then you have human rights organizations and researchers and scientists, and I think it's very important to bring the people together, because it also increases the pressure of what I think is important in the design of these systems and continuously review is the civilian harm mitigation, because we don't want to go back to the times of carpet bombing, as you mentioned. Like, how good is technology if it brings us back to the times before the Geneva Conventions, where there were large-scale civilian harm, and the reason we have the Geneva Conventions is that we want to prevent this type of future. So we don't want to be heading, with this type of speed into like an AI-enabled new, mass destruction weapon, and that's really what I would want to continue pushing the military and governments in. We need regulation, and we need to have civilian harm mitigation that is in the design of these systems, because otherwise, if the weapons are not more accurate, what are they worth?
David, I just want to end with saying that, you've said freedom isn't free, and that when you hear the word regulation, you run out of the room, but I do want to share one quick experience of our own back to that Maoist conflict, and I really appreciate the Indian Army, because there was discussion at a point that the army would be brought into the heart of India, to quell that uprising. And we were some of the few journalists that were really going in and reporting from the ground. And the army actually reached out for a kind of consultative conversation, and I'm sure there were many other reasons why eventually they decided to go with the police really quelling that rather than the Indian Army, because the Indian Army's psyche is different, it is to kill an adversary. A police is a more domestic security situation. The psyche is different. And, that consultation, amongst many other things I'm sure the Indian Army did, kind of changed the strategy, whereas some of what one is hearing, and we understand what the complex realm you're in, the seat you sit on, but without consultation, you might be just reinforcing your own bias on a lot of things, And there's a lot of that, they're the lefties, like with Palantir and the ICE raids. The discourse in America has become so polarized that I don't think it would be possible in an American situation for the two of you to sit in the same room and talk to each other, So I really hope that's going to be possible. Thank you very much, both of you, for the great insights. Thank you.